I see the technology as sort of training wheels. It's a way to kind of help you find that state, but it's not the state itself. It can't make you all of a sudden turn into a healer or turn into a medium. You still have to practice, and you still have to learn how to, work with your own mind.
Welcome to the Consciousness of the Way. I am your humble servant and Sifu, Taoist Master San Qing, and I want to welcome back to the podcast dear friend Jeff Tarrant, and he is a PhD in all things neurology, neuroscience, and the contribution of elevating people's consciousness to mankind. I want to welcome you back to the podcast, my dear friend.
Thank you very much. It's good to be back. I appreciate it.
Yeah. I'm kind of excited about this conversation today, my dear friend. You got me all fired up. Is this contributing to precognition? Maybe, perhaps. But let's look at, why don't we go right into it? For all the people that don't know who Jeff is, that are watching him for the first time, go back to his first podcast and go into his story and how we got to this point. But let's dive right into your research and what you've been contributing since we last spoke.
Sure. Yeah. And just for, if people aren't familiar, a lot of the work that I've been doing over the last, really 10 years has been doing brain imaging, especially quantitative EEG analysis of, mediums, psychic abilities, healing, things of that nature, and trying to understand what the heck's going on in people's brains when they're engaged in, whatever you want to call them, psi abilities or super normal abilities or whatever. And so, that's taken an interesting avenue, because recently I've been involved with studying nonverbal or non-speaking. I shouldn't say nonverbal, because they do communicate verbally. They just do it by typing. Non-speaking autistic individuals that are ridiculously accurate in telepathic activities usually with their primary caregiver. And so it's been featured in the telepathy tapes, which many of your listeners may be aware of, because it has just taken off and done amazingly well. And so, so that's been kind of the next layer of kind of some of the work that I've been up to.
Wow. That's just so exciting. I mean, it kind of falls in line with a lot of the spiritual community talking about this raising of consciousness, which is the hot topic button for most people. And furthermore, in your community, really being able to measure this phenomena that people are still sort of like trying to wrap their mind around and what that really means to them. And now there is far more evidence of this. This is something that I've been beating the drum and teaching people for decades, but it excites many. And I think this is a really crossroads, because right now you have the verging of like transhumanism, and we have this option. Where do we go with this? You're just discovering these incredible phenomena that are available to everyone. But now we're going to have an option where, do you want option A or B? Would you like a chip in your brain, or do you want to do it yourself? I think it's kind of like where we're at right now in humanity. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's interesting, because a lot of my work is kind of incorporating both, right? Like trying to take advantage of the wisdom that has been passed down for centuries, thousands of years, but then also taking advantage of technology, current technology. And so, because I do a lot of brain imaging type work, some of what I'm trying to do is also kind of reverse engineer and say, oh, okay, well, if there's certain patterns that consistently show up when people are doing a mediumship reading or healing or something like that, is there a way to kind of train the brain to get into that state, to facilitate it? And, one of the things that I think is important, and I think you'll probably agree with this, is that, I see the technology as sort of training wheels. It's a way to kind of help you find that state, but it's not the state itself. It can't make you all of a sudden turn into a healer or turn into a medium. You still have to practice, and you still have to learn how to, work with your own mind. However, there may be ways to kind of nudge the brain in the right direction, maybe give you a little bit of a leg up as you're trying to develop and explore these abilities.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of goes back to the method in the madness. So for a Taoist, it's accumulating a vibratory state that obviously is frequential, and then holding that resonance, and then you show evidence of results. And it has to be repeatable. This is the part of the mastery and the cultivational practice that I think you're referring to. It's like you can be exposed to it, but now you have to be able to repeat it and return back to it. I kind of use that as what we call, I developed an app that shares that with people. You do, I call it the Easter egg, where you can instantly access that state and then hold that resonance longer so that it's true to you. And then, of course, you have to create evidence of this rather than, oh, yeah, look, I feel amazing. Okay, well, when you produce something that is in the form of some clairvoyance or mediumship or channeling that can be verifiable by someone outside of your own little mind, now we're off to the races.
Yeah, for sure. And, kind of in that angle, one of the things that I've been, another project that has been, coming out that we've been working on for a while is using remote neurofeedback with people. And, for those that aren't familiar, neurofeedback is basically just biofeedback with brainwaves. So you're just getting information about what your brain is doing in real time. And so, what we've been able to do is identify particular states, mental states, brainwave states that are consistent with certain meditation practices. And so then, as people are meditating, they can be getting some direct feedback from the system, like, okay, you're there, right? Or, yeah, no, you're not there. And so it becomes this kind of internal, external, like you're using external information to become more aware of your internal state. And then it's like, oh, well, can I shift my consciousness so that I get the feedback again, right? And it's like, oh, where is it? And sometimes that's what it feels like. It's like, where's that state? You're kind of like looking around, but then it's like when you kind of land there, it's like, boom. And so, the idea for me with this is that you're kind of teaching people what it feels like, the felt sense of being in a particular state. And, not that we want them dependent on the technology, but it may be a way to help people understand what the feeling is so they can get back there, on their own more efficiently. I joke sometimes that, because my background's as a psychologist, and, people come in with anxiety, and it's like, okay, we need to teach you some relaxation. And I didn't understand this for a long time, but a lot of these people, they don't even know what relaxation feels like. So, you're talking about relaxation and they actually have no idea. They understand it conceptually, but they don't actually know what it feels like. So how can they get there? They don't even know where they're trying to go. And so anyway, I like using things like the neurofeedback as a tool to help people go like, okay, here's where you're going. You're there, you're not there, right? So that you can, kind of find where the boundaries are.
Yeah, I mean, it's phenomenal because some people will be distracted by their finite mind, their intellect, their personality. But the true essence of that a moment, which we would call a unified state within Taoism, is finding the center point, the vesicle between yin and yang. And that's what we call the primordial mother. But furthermore, the evidence for that in this material state would be a Taoist is taking immortality, crystallizing it into a material state. So now you have something beyond the electromagnetism that gives you evidence of true healing, manifestation, magic, however, but you have to repeat it. And I love what you're doing in relation to having someone, because when you get to a certain point of what we call the point of no return, where you detach and attach as all things, that means that your personality can be running wild with this nonsense, yet you can feel the very moment whenever I witness a healing, I am no place, person, or thing. It's the feeling, the experience that has nothing to do with whether I like chocolate bonbons or running through the desert naked. It doesn't matter. It's that feeling. And I love what you're doing and bringing the attention back, because the attention intention changes the variability, the probability of actually a change in this state itself. What do you think of that?
Yeah, no, I love what you're saying, and I think you'll appreciate this. Recently, another little project that I did was, my current qigong teacher. He's also he's an acupuncturist, and he does craniosacral work. And so I went through a year-long training with him for biodynamic craniosacral therapy. And if that form of craniosacral is not really manipulative. It's much more of kind of connecting with the person and their energy field, and creating a space, an energetic space, so that their system can move to a place of balance on its own. And they've got this whole thing when they talk about this of basically when you're in the zone with this work, you're not there, right? It's this sort of like spacious expansion where you're kind of connected with this other person, but you're not doing anything, right? You're just allowing. And so anyway, I brought my teacher in one day and hooked his brain up while he did a session for somebody. And it was interesting because at one point, he's working up the body and he gets up to the head, and then he kind of signals me, he winked at me or something to let me know that he was, in the zone. And when we looked at his brain waves, when he was there, basically everything dropped out. So all the brain waves like dropped pretty dramatically. And, and so for me, that was really interesting because I've only seen that happen a few times where just all the brain waves go down to sort of zero. Well, I mean, they can't go to zero, you'd be dead. But, but they drop dramatically. I've seen it with a really expert channeler. When she was channeling, all of her brain waves dropped out, even though she's talking and spitting out this wisdom. All the brain waves dropped out. And I saw it another time with one of my very first teachers who was kind of into more shamanic stuff. And when he went into some sort of a meditative state, everything dropped out. So I've seen this pattern a few times, and I'm starting to think that it's associated with what you were just describing, of kind of getting into this space where Jeff as a personality isn't there anymore, and something else is taking over, whatever it is. And because I've seen it in a couple of different instances that are all different, it's like, well, there's obviously some differences here. Channeling isn't the same as doing this healing session, but what's the commonality? And for me, the commonality is that you have to get yourself completely out of the way. You're not there. And so anyway, I think there may be a connection with that process and maybe what you're describing. I don't know. Does that make sense for you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the extreme is the lens of reality through a Taoist is yin and yang. These are the electromagnetic currency that we work with in this material state. The task of a Taoist seeker is to find the center point. And from that, you can be all things or nothing at the same time. And so identity is not that. The finite mind is bankrupt. It's empty. There's nothing to it. So when you put your personality or your intellect into the equation, you will constantly separate yourself from this state, this present moment. And so there's two things that go with that, because you can either be evidence of no things or evidence of all things. So you're sharing evidence of no things, which on a brainwave scale would be equivalent to epsilon or something below an evidence-based frequency that someone would consciously be in. And furthermore, when I witness healing, I'm on the other end of the spectrum. I'm high gamma. So, and I'm all things, which the evidence of whether that does anything will be in what is that person creating within that moment? Is there a physical healing, or is it just a transfer of energy? Someone feels a little better. You're rubbing up their mechanoreceptors so they just feel relaxed and just all warm and fuzzy inside? Or is there evidence of physical healing, mental, emotional, spiritual? And so that would be the extreme of the electromagnetism of this state, either being at one end of the scale or the other from a brainwave perspective. So what would that, like, if you were looking at it from little to no brain activity, what would that be equated to? Would that be epsilon or beyond that?
I mean, I'm not 100% sure, because, the systems that I use don't really get, there's a limit to the frequencies that we can look at. And, my interpretation is that, from a purely scientific perspective, well, not purely, I guess, but, when the brain does that, clearly you're no longer functioning the way that you normally function, right? It's like something dramatic has changed in your internal space, in your internal state. And so, to me, that's really intriguing. And it makes me wonder if that's not a similar state to sort of a non-dual kind of a state, and maybe that's what you're describing, right? Like the in between the yin and yang.
Well, yeah, that's what we call the Wu Ji, the primordial mother. And so when you are experiencing that, you will witness as someone, because really this healing, manifestation, magic, this does not require your participation. So you instantly identify as unification when you move out of the way, as you put it. You move to the side. Now, it's conceptual for most people. And this is where the mastery of alchemy comes in. Because, merging yin and yang, you can do any numerous amounts of different, what they would call tricks or healings. Whether I teach someone how to merge those energies and acquire an electric charge that gives you a zap at will, or there's something more to that. And more recently, when you train in that type of alchemy, people go, well, what's the purpose of that? That's like a complete reset. Yes, you might do it randomly. You're walking on your carpet and poof, oh, I zapped myself, or I zapped someone. No, I'm talking about merging those energies and creating a state within what you call the physical body to acquire that charge at will. Now, most people get obsessed with what we call the yang, which is the material evidence of yin within this state. And what happens is the physical traits start to present themselves as people become more and more obsessed with one part of the spectrum instead of staying in the center, which you then are fully charged and there's no limitation. But people refer to their constitution, their essence, and they get trapped in that. And they use the parlor tricks by acquiring this energy. And as they put it, it's called selling your soul. You literally start to, a lot of these healers and psychics and channelers that I get on my doorstep, the first thing I ask them is, how do you feel at the end of the day? Exhausted, because you're selling yourself. Your actual attention intention is drawing from your life force instead of that unified state that we speak of through this conversation, which does not require you. It is abundant, timeless, endless, limitless. But that's all conceptual until you can actually repeat it and see evidence of that cultivational practice. And that's why alchemy, Taoist alchemy, to me is second to none, because that's what you teach, but that's the foundation of healing, returning people back to whole. How have you been through your journeys within, it sounds to me like you're studying this stuff and has been for some time. How is that working for you?
How's it working for me?
Yeah.
Personally?
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because, I think one of the things that I've found recently is that I'm spending too much mental energy. So I'm not in a balanced state, recently. All of this stuff's very interesting and it's very exciting and there's a lot of fun opportunities. But then what it's doing is it's keeping me sort of engaged in, the physical realm and stuff, and mental constructs. And so, that's one of the things I've been recently, trying to kind of like reestablish some balance, and recognize that it's kind of like, okay, yeah, that's all fun and good. But when it comes down to it, none of that really matters. And, so how can I kind of get that perspective back of just being and just being present, without constantly pushing and pulling and stressing and creating dynamics that aren't particularly helpful. So and that's an easy trap for me. I think it is for most people, but I know my personality, and I can get excited about things and I get wound up, and I like a certain amount of stress, and but it's easy to get off balance. And so recently, I've been working to kind of reestablish that. And you've brought up the term magic a few times, and it's interesting because I've been exploring more kind of high magic practices as well, and just kind of stepping into that a little bit, which I find pretty interesting. And I'm just starting it in that regard, but I feel like it's all connected.
Well, you're in the right house if you're interested in Taoist alchemy, which is the foundation of magic. I'm more than happy to give you a few little pointers on where you want to go in direction-wise, because that imbuing things and imprinting them and materializing them in this realm is the ultimate path of a Taoist seeker. And it's not a delusional sort of transitory state. You have to repeat it. And I think that through your own admission, when you become a little bit more into the material, the physical, the yang, through certain, Qigong practices or, Bagua, Tai Chi, you can get caught up in just spending your own energy instead of being unified and realizing that you're abundant, timeless, endless, limitless, infinite. And that comes into the, reeling of the silk and fortifying the physical body to more endurance. Well, what I'm speaking of within the alchemy is alchemizing the 50 trillion cells that you have and commandeering that energy at will, always at 100%, at what we call 9,000%, once you charge that battery up and you stay there. It's never minimized, it's never reduced. And this sort of gives me evidence. And one of my dear friends, Tom Campbell, I don't know whether you know who that guy is.
I know the name.
He's an interesting sprite young man at 81, and we'll have podcasts that go for 7.5 hours. And he and I won't take a potty break. Neither will I, nor anything other than maybe some tea. I mean, he doesn't even drink like water, tea, anything. And he's just as charged. And we talk about this. It's like you have to be what you call in a fluid state. We refer to that Wu Ji. We bring it back to what we call Wu Wei. And that's the ability to create what we call this electromagnetism is in the form of currency, energy. And your attention intention forms that. And we can go into what physics models are or whatever, but you must be able to experience it and validate it for yourself. But that energy is now the currency of this reality. And your mission, if you choose to accept it, Ethan Hunt, is to find that center point. And your Sherlock to your Watson is take those crumbs and move through the labyrinth of the finite mind and reveal that you are unified. And so evidence is like, oh my goodness, I feel mentally spent. This is evidence that you're detaching yourself from your own default, which is oneness, which is unification. And it's so profound when you find that sobering moment that you have come to that conclusion, no one else. And when you look at the elements, if I look at the elements in your aura, that would be more evident in the liver channel. And then that presents itself because it starts dominance over the excess of the spleen. And the spleen rises up quite often for you. So you go between the magnification of grounding, and then you get excess due to the mental emotional state. Does that make any sense to you?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. And actually, you know, like connecting this to something that you were talking about earlier, I sort of had a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I know like in the, you know, Yoga Sutras, you know, they talk about that through meditation you can develop all of these abilities, clairvoyance and telekinesis and all sorts of things. And then they also kind of say, yeah, you don't really want to spend that much energy there. You know, like it's, yes, it happens. Yes, you can do these things, but that's not the point. Like, don't get caught up in that. And it's an interesting idea. And I wonder if that ties in with what you're saying, right? That it's like, you can, sure, those things can happen and you can use them. But if you get sort of caught in, you know, that sort of whatever we want to call it, if that becomes your identity and that becomes what's all important and that's what you're cultivating and that's the only thing you want to do, then it's like you're kind of missing the point. You're getting pulled. It's another thing to pull you away from the center point.
Well, no, I agree with you. It's like a non-dualist sort of state. You have to understand that whenever I have a student and they get all excited about the alchemy and they want to learn levitation and zapping people and physical healing and all the clair senses, they get super excited. Channeling is the most potent high level of ascension when you are able to access direct source information, and it will come in a visceral, kinesthetic, and somatic response. And so psychosomatic is an interesting term. You reference your psychology. You're actually speaking on the actual truth, which is it comes from the mind and you're experiencing it physically. That is not a delusional state, yet so many people want to put a label on someone with that very, you know, definition. And so you will see that through the experience. But you must be able to what we call accumulate the riches. So, you know, if I'm teaching someone iron shirt training, iron fist training, projecting the spirit, the Shen, from the physical body, where you accumulate and saturate the cell at a subatomic level, you now have 3 layers of what we would call a level of plasma that you have to break through physically through your opponent's ability to generate and cultivate. And this is the obsession that most people get caught in. So they get to the Qigong, the Bagua, the Tai Chi. Oh my goodness, I can do a 1-inch punch and I can get into my body. We move more into the primordial mother. And I feel like I'm probably the only person that consciously on this planet as a Taoist that teaches the primordial essence, which is yin, it's not yang, which is the fundamental womb of all creation. It is the void. And so yang is just a seed or mirroring effect of yin within this electromagnetism. But ultimately, it is the creation of all things. And once you have access to that, you develop psychic abilities, yin eyes, your ability to take your attention, intention, and create at will. These are all measurable things that individuals can take on. But the first thing that you have acknowledged is that ability to go, yeah, I'm mentally spent on some of this stuff. I need to reevaluate where is homeostasis, where is the center point, because I want to feel like it's effortless action, which is what Wu Wei is, effortless effort. And that is a attention, intention, forming the currency, which is energy. And then it has a vibratory, frequential, ultimately resonance. You have to hold that. You have to have a container that holds that. And once you do that, you will see the repeatable evidence of that from your experience and go, hey, I put my attention, intention to something, and this person was healed, that came out of a coma. All these things are absolutely everyday type of experiences I'm used to. And once you are able to repeat the resonance and hold it, I mean, I have thousands of students over the years that have been able to apply that. And it's like, how deep do you want to go? Because as you go along your path, it should be more and more instantaneous to a point where you can think it and it is realized. Not, oh my goodness, I got to conjure all this stuff up, my mental state. Oh man, I'm feeling drained. I didn't get the right angels coming in and I wasn't sitting in the lotus position and I didn't drink my oolong tea at the right time. And now, holy shit, now the healing's not going to happen. This is the basically the fallacy, because a lot of people tend to keep people in the weeds, because you will become more and more in line with beyond light speed, which is now you think it and it becomes realized. That's the potency of what we're talking about. And it does present itself, just like you said, you will be able to feel it. If you're thinking you're not knowing, if you're knowing, you're feeling, and you'll know, holy moly, I'm there, but I just had a thought about chocolate cookies and spending time with my girlfriend on the weekend. It doesn't matter. It happened. And it will materialize also visually, and you'll be able to see all the elements that create that. As you know, whenever I'm witnessing physical healing, mental, emotional, spiritual, there's a void that comes over the space that I'm in. I no longer see anything. If I'm looking at you, everything falls away. It's darkness. And then the construction of what we call the diamond of perfection presents itself in a very condensed form as phosphorus white light. And as I put my attention, intention as the primordial mother, I'm no longer San Qing. So I don't need to ask. It's now. Healing is now. Intention is now. Manifestation is now, because I'm not asking, oh, universe, can you please help me? Could you possibly give me a little helping hand? You are that now moment, which presents itself as unification. So you're being commandeered with your attention, intention as that state. You think it and it becomes realized. Healing, manifestation, magic. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm curious what your take is. So these autistic individuals who are non-speakers, so they communicate by pointing to a letterboard or whatnot, and there's dozens of them that have been sort of interviewed now, and not only are they super telepathic, but many of them talk about talking to dead relatives and spiritual stuff, and they have knowledge that there's no way they could have by normal means, right? In school they were treated like kindergartners, even though they've got a keen intellect, so they were never taught anything in school. And many of them know multiple languages. They know musical stuff. They know advanced math, the philosophical things, right? So they know all this stuff. They talk about meeting together on this place they call the Hill, where they all just go mentally or whatever, psychically, and go hang out with each other and like chit chat and share information and things, right? So they've got abilities. It's not just the telepathy. There's other stuff, right? Some of them have precognitive stuff, it just goes on and on. And so it's interesting, right? Because they haven't done anything intentionally to cultivate that. They just have it. And to me, at least part of it seems to be probably connected to the fact that they don't communicate verbally, that they're not caught up in language and structure and, which I think probably adds to the mental gymnastics, right? It adds another layer of not being in reality, because now you're manipulating thoughts and ideas and whatever. And so anyway, I'm curious what your guess is as to why these particular individuals seem to be so tapped in just kind of naturally, if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah. I mean, once you acquire that resonance, and this happens to everyone that builds a developmental skill that you believe has not been focused on, but, we can start getting into, reincarnation, incarnation, past life, whatever. Let's just talk about the now. Their ability to not be distracted by one other component, another icon on their computer screen, and they've never had anyone validate it to not be so, that their present moment and just realizing this is my form of communication and I can do it at will repeat itself. So, depending upon the age of the child, I mean, I have 6 kids of my own. I teach them all these types of skills, and they don't have any. Most of them, quite frankly, all of them still believe in Santa Claus, because I haven't stolen that from them, because my 12-year-old is like, I can't wait for Santa to come and get the cookies next year. And the truth is that limitation, the idea that you're trapped in the mind prison as intellect, can be very discouraging if you don't know how to move past it. And that's where the actual experience, the feeling, the commandeering of that becomes a knowing. Like the pulpability of the energy when I look into their fields is like, it's like syrup. Like they can literally put their attention, intention, and they can feel the cogs moving within their mind into what you would call the ether and altering things at will. This is a very powerful substance, but they have never been contradicted to say that this was not possible. And by having one less sense where they're not communicating verbally, they're experiencing it in their mind. And I think that it's a disservice when someone says mind, body, spirit. It's a trap to disassociate yourself as whole and be unified by having to think about, well, my mind, my brain is separate from my physical body, and my spirit is separate from my physical body. My intention is just part of a mechanism within my mind, which I'd associate as my brain. When, you know, ancient indigenous practices will tell you otherwise. We always speak of, you are a macro of micro. Everything exists within you that is external, and you can change that at will, but it must be mastered. Like there is a density. All I do is concentrate my energy. And furthermore, we've had this conversation before. When I focus that as the primordial mother, there was a huge amount of accumulation of energy in my upper dantian that then charges through my whole physical body, and it turns on like a Christmas tree at will. And I know I'm right there. I'm in the center point. I'm in the flow, baby. And I can experience change instantaneously, you know. And you start with very limited things. Like I always tell people, why don't you start with a barking dog in the distance that you hear in your neighborhood? And what happens is the reflection of that, the deficiency of the dog barking is for the lack of attention. Furthermore, it's a sentient being that doesn't have a barometer of whether you hurt my feelings or not. What it's looking for is unconditional love, is what it puts out. So the second you transmit that to that dog barking, it silences it, and it will feel it energetically, instantaneously. And so these are a very basic, like run-of-the-mill exercises that you start to get involved with to see your own potency and power. These kids are absolutely off the charts, and they can move in and out of their physical body at will because no one's given them a limitation for that. So yes, you're just scratching the surface of their potential. But, you know, a lot of people will start with, oh, shit, I saw grandma, but, you know, I think it's kind of, I don't know. It's probably nonsense. You know, people are telling me I'm crazy. I need to shut that down. And, you know, I personally have never had that as a child because I was really a latchkey kid raised by a single parent. So my direction of my attention, intention, developing the skills that I've have never been, you know, controlled by a limitation of what potential was. And I think that has a fundamental contribution to someone's ability to access this stuff. And you must start, as you said, you must start with the feeling, because the feeling will be contradictory to what you're thinking in your mind. And I always tell people, at a certain point, who cares what you're thinking? It's nonsensical. That's that part where, you know, as a psychologist, you would say, hang on, you can't tell people that's not real. Oh, yes, I can. And I remind people that your finite mind, the chatter, the ego, personality is nothing more that's run by the environment. And if it's a high frequency state that is evidence of like a beta, high beta, and you just merge into your environment and you add a cup of coffee and a couple of spoonfuls of sugar, you're going to be an erratic nutcase, which would seem at face value as an impossible thing to harness. Yet, absolutely not. You can be in the moment of, and a lot of times people will look at me and go, you're just sitting here and you're doing nothing, having a conversation about the last UFC fight, and you just participated in a physical healing. How is that possible? Because that's not real. What's real is my attunement to that. Now, it can be quite dangerous for many people that want to fear-base themselves into a restricted limitation of what's possible, because you're saying, hey, this material world is not real. Your attention intention to alter it is. That is a delusional state for many people. It's hard for them to cross over that line. That's why the evidence is so important. You have to produce it. You have to repeat it. And that's why I love about all the things you're doing, because you're getting clear evidence-based data that contradicts all the nonsense of, Cleo, the psychic, 1-800, the biggest fraud on the face of humanity back in the 90s. Call the 1-800 line and get Cleo to give you your future. I mean, that was a disservice. But then again, commercial Hollywood loves to abuse their power, right? And it doesn't help in the certain cause. But, when I do things like speak on elements and energy within your body, and they're completely relevant to understanding how your mind is made up, doesn't that excite you? For me, I get excited. I'm like a little giddy kid. It's like, I just look at your energy potential and it gives me your mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual state in about 5 seconds. And it's like, hang on a second. Well, you've at some point come to the conclusion that that's possible. So when I shared that with you, it's like, oh, that's normal communication that I have with a lot of psychics. They're able to share these things with me. This is what we call clear evidence of psychokinesis. And you are able to have this moment where you are reading energy. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And actually, one of the points that you were kind of bringing up made me think about some of what I've seen. You brought up psychokinesis, and, when you look at the research on psychokinesis, and obviously there's data to show that that's real and people can influence things, but it's usually very tiny, right? And I saw a study recently, and they were basically showing that, whatever, there was some sort of significant effect, but it was very tiny. And they measured, I don't remember, I'll make it up. They measured 100 people doing the thing. And what they found was that it was really like 2 people that accounted for the vast majority of the effect, right? Like the other 98 people, it was like, they may or may not have a little bit of a potential, but 2 of them like knocked it out of the park, right? And so when they would go back and interview those people that do good on these tasks, it's like, well, what are you doing? Like, what's the thing, right? And the number one thing that comes up is resonance. They might use a different language, but basically like feeling connected to whatever the thing is, right? If they feel connected to it, they can do whatever they want. But if they lose that resonance, then forget it. It ain't gonna happen. So it seems very much in line with what you were just describing.
Well, yeah, evidence of what some illusionists or mentalists, and we're talking about magician-like stuff, Hollywood stuff, that these people make claim to showing illusions, but they're actually riding the backs of very ancient indigenous practices that are very real. That, when someone calls someone a mentalist, they're not referring to hermetic principles. They're referring to someone that creates an illusion in the idea that you're experiencing what a magician would call PK touch, which is creating the illusion that you're able to touch the physical body through energy potential of another person that is separate from the experiment. So when you see David Blaine doing that, I will tell you 100% David Blaine has learned that powerful skill of psychokinesis for real. This is not an illusion. But there are many magicians that will play that illusion where it's a sleight of hand, but it's absolutely possible. So when you and I have this conversation, it's a union. It's a communion of what someone would refer to as the biofields. Even though there is a distance between us, there is evidence of this energy potential. And I never like to front load people, but when they start to go, oh, hang on a second, just by allowing myself to be present, those other 98% of people that didn't experience the 2 phenomena where the people were connecting with it, which would be, psychometry, their basically their attention intention, as we spoke on it, is on that center point, and that's the energy potential, and it's revealing itself through their physical flesh, and they can go, wow, I'm actually experiencing this, which is furthermore something like this is the same communion. Our communication through very little, I can take someone to the action of the breath, which is an inaction, because people don't refer to that as action, yet that is very much all it takes. You can create what we call embryonic breathing or primordial breathing, where you're breathing from the ether. You're not breathing from the physical flesh. And that becomes more evident where the heart rate drops down. Evidence of the biofield is expansive, but not from the physical body. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Very cool. So I'm aware of time. Sorry to I've only got a couple of minutes
Yep.
before I got to move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
Back to that topic, right? There's like, I got too much going on. Fill my schedule, fill my brain with all kinds of nonsense. But I did want to make one other point, because we were talking about these non-speakers. And one of the things that really struck me listening to the telepathy tapes, a couple of the individuals that I haven't met personally, but they communicated that for them, learning that they had a body was like a revelation. Like they, and so, when you look at a lot of those autistic individuals, and they don't have good control over their body. They're doing odd things and moving in unusual ways and flapping their hands and things like that. But then when you hear this person being able to communicate and go like, I didn't even know I had a body, and so like getting in touch with that, like, so they're on a totally different level. And so it's no wonder that their body is doing all kinds of unusual things, because they're not there most of the time. They're elsewhere. And so, again, I think that maybe that's a piece of all this, right? That they're on a different level. And so they're not totally connected to this physical realm in the same way that most of us are.
Well, yeah, they're activated and burnt into their energy body at a higher ascended level. So it's like all this is on. Below, the solar plexus is off. And that is sort of like part of the rite of passage when you get immersed in alchemy. You must activate that tactile, you must feel the resistance of yin and yang to activate those energy centers, to dissolve the parameters, the boundaries of the human condition. Furthermore, surrender the sexual dysfunction, and then activate the solar plexus to be able to be the central hub for disseminating and putting in whatever mental, emotional things that you are constructing, and putting them in the right place, or ultimately transmitting them and dissolving them so they are not having a transmuted effect that materialize into a physical ailment. And this is part of the journey. And that component is just like I'm dealing with. I haven't had it. I used to, back in the day, as a Taoist priest, do a lot of exorcisms, because that's part of one of my rituals as an ordained priest from that monastery. Haven't done those in 10 or 12 years. Got a half a dozen of people from bipolar to schizophrenia, and they've done it all. They've used the medication. I'm willing to experience this and see what the outcome is. Now, I'm going to record those and probably put them on Rumble, but you're going to watch an unraveling of someone and a liberation, because what happens with also your participants in the telepathy tapes is they haven't been trained in an off switch or a regulated state where they can have dominion over everything. They're not offered that. So they're in one extreme or another. And so when you look at things that would form in a psychological state as schizophrenia, bipolar, all these types of things, they're met when you work with the energy and you extract it, you'll see a whole different, their whole physical face disappears. They'll unravel. It'll look like something out of a Hollywood movie, and they are liberated once you go through that ritual, which is the magic that you're talking about. And that is very much founded in the relationship between the Taoist and the universe. And we do a lot of fundamental work by laying down the grids, activating power centers, vortices, portals, and then using these ancient star-stepping rituals to harness that energy and take the immortal energy of the primordial mother and transmute it into a material state where you can see actual evidence of this material. So I think you're on the right track, my dear friend. And if you ever want to go any further on some of these things, you want a few pointers, I'm always here to give you a little insight.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. And yeah, I'll be reaching out and, outside of the podcast and see, if we can't connect and, because I'd love to learn more and experience a little bit more myself. It's outside of my head. I'd love to take advantage of that.
That's the biggest thing is you're evidence-based and your intellect keeps pursuing information. That's the very deconstruction of your evidence. The more and more you accumulate information, the more confused you become. You need to find that path, see evidence, and it's got to be experiential evidence and then form from that. And that's what part of accumulating and absorbing the riches is. You see instant evidence where you're literally creating a DMT experience through your own cultivation. And initially it freaks people out, but this is the mastery that you have when you are putting your attention intention. And it doesn't matter what the intellect of the finite mind is creating, you'll feel it. And it doesn't matter who it is. I've seen people that are in their mind going, oh yeah, it's not possible. Hang on, what happened here? Are you there?
Yep.
Yeah, in their mind that it's not possible, and they're like monkey mind. And the truth is, once they start harnessing the energy, they get their own knowing and validation, which is so important. So I would love to help you on that journey, my dear friend.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Yeah, I will. I'll definitely reach out.
Okay. And in closing, we want everyone to go out and start experiencing some of your findings. Where is the more recent stuff? Where can we find that?
Yeah, good question. Some of the things are in, I had a book come out about a year or so ago, and we may have talked about that the last time I was on. It's called Becoming Psychic, Lessons from the Minds of Mediums, Healers, and Psychics. And so that contains a lot of, kind of the background of kind of what got me to this point. Of course, folks that are interested in listening to the Telepathy Tapes podcast, because that, I have a minor role in that, but it really, I think, contains a lot of information that's consistent with our conversation today. And then, I've got a couple of websites where there's a lot of information, psychicmindscience.com and NeuroMeditationInstitute.com. So there's a lot of information and free resources on there if people are interested.
Excellent. Excellent. I want everyone to go out and experience it. And I look forward to a future conversation on and off camera. And if you don't have my cell phone, I'll send it to you. I think I sent you my cell phone, but in any case, you can have access. And, there's nothing more exciting. I get excited, and it's a little selfish, but selfish is selfless when people actually obtain an insight to their own mastery. And it is a banger. Trust me. There'll be no delusion about whether it's possible or not once I'm done with you, my dear friend.
I love it.
Okay. Well, thank you again.
Okay.
Jeff,
Thank you
for everything you do for the community. I want to thank you. I want to thank the universe for bringing you into my life. I want to thank the audience for sharing their time with us today. I'm your humble servant and seafood, Taoist Master San Qing, and I'll see you in the next one, guys.